Welcome to Co-Branded, your go-to source for brand strategy, design, and business insights.
Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, we're here to help you build your brand with confidence.
Let's dive in. So, Zuza.
Oh, Josh. Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good.
We've already had a quite an interesting conversation today about lots of things, actually. None of it, well, not none of it. Some of it not appropriate for a podcast of a branding and business development, but good conversation.
Yep.
And now we're going to dive into the concept of brand evolution and the kind of nuances, or at least kind of the three phases that we talk a little bit about in terms of when and why and how you are applying adjustments to your brand over time. We talk about the idea of rebranding. Rebranding is probably a pretty common term in design and just business, but there's nuances to that. A rebrand itself can be a certain aspect of the changes that you're making to your organization. The way that I like to think about it in a visual sense is like a ship sailing on the ocean. If it's going straight, you're headed on course, you're good. Your brand is square and you don't really have to make a lot of adjustments to it. But sometimes you'll need to adjust course slightly. So you just turn the wheel a little bit. And to me, that's kind of a brand alignment phase. And we'll kind of dive into what that means. And then if you have to change course, you're going north, now you need to go west.
You mean like Jaguar?
Like Jaguar?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can't believe you brought it up already.
You knew
yes.
it was going to happen.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You're going this way, now you're going this way. That's a rebrand. That is a bigger shift in your organization from really a lot of aspects. And then there's one other one that I consider that doesn't happen as often. It's a little bit more in the startup world, but it's the concept of a pivot. And a lot of times that can really mean a totally change in what your business model is completely, who your market is, what your product is. It's a very drastic change. It's not just about branding.
Mm-hmm.
You may be changing all the core aspects of who you are, identity, values, culture, all that kind of stuff. But generally, brands don't have a lot of variation in their culture, their core identity, their values, the reason why they exist. Those generally stay true over the course of the organization, but then you'll have these alignments and rebrands at different stages in the organization to make sure that your brand is current, stays active, and aligns with the market that you're in at that time.
Sometimes they do, but let's say that mostly they don't if the brand knows why they're doing what they're doing,
Yes.
what the culture really is, and once they have a grasp on their strategy.
Very good point. If they haven't established those things, it's not defined yet, then it can adjust. But once an organization sets those things in stone a little bit or builds their foundation of their company, then a lot of times the adjustments are more visual, messaging, marketing based in terms of those things. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about what the alignment is, like a brand alignment, not a rebrand, but an alignment. So the way that I think about it is that it's smaller adjustments to your organization. It could be maybe the visuals and messaging don't really line up to where you're at currently, but the core of your foundation still fits well. It could be updates to stay consistent with the market, with the technology, with the times, or even if you're launching a new product or you're just trying to redefine a little bit of how you speak to your audience. To me, those are more the phases of alignment.
So how do I know as a business owner that it's time for brand alignment?
Yeah, sometimes it can be about growth. If your internal organization is starting to grow, let's say you're a team of 20. A team of 20 and a team of 50 are really different organizations. And even a team of 100 changes drastically. So at some points in your organization's pipeline, pathway, timeline, that's the word I was looking for. Timeline. You will have to take a moment and pause and make sure that your process is in place right, the way that you speak about your organization, the way you speak about your audience, your team. There's moments of growth that you'll have to realign or create some more alignment in terms of your brand. That could be visuals, that could be messaging, but it could just simply be internal processes too.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about the growth of a company and hiring more people.
Sure.
Okay. So what are other examples of a brand that needs alignment? I guess the question is, how do I know that there's something wrong, and what are the things that could be wrong, and how do I measure that to know that I need to align?
Yeah, some of those things could be simply your marketing dollars aren't reaching as far as they used to, that your pipeline or your lead funnel isn't doing what you think it should based off of your industry or market. And some of it could be that you're actually going to start investing more into particular aspects, such as advertising spends, or even you're launching a new product. Those are really clear moments where you should pause, make sure that things are how you think they should be. There's a lot of different ways to test that, whether it's data driven or focus group or even just intuition. But generally, at times in your organization, you have to pause and reassess. You can't just blindly just keep running in the direction. But, you know, there's no like this way fits all kind of solutions in that sense. But there's usually pivot. I don't want to use the word pivot because we already used that in a different term. There are moments where you should look at your brand, look at your marketing, look at your messaging, look at your visuals, and make sure that they align with what you're going to do next.
Okay. The reason why I had a weird reaction here when you said focus groups,
Yeah.
it's only because I always believed that focus groups were the way to really know what people think. And then it turned out there were some statistics that basically said that focus groups are not super accurate. Most importantly, because people do have in the back of their head that they should have a specific reaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of want to, I don't know, please
Sure.
whoever, right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say one example of testing packaging on an actual shelf in an actual store asking potential clients.
Yeah.
To me is actually kind of worthless.
Really? Okay.
Yes, and the reason why is because people are in a hurry. People just want to do their shopping. People are actually very, what's the word? Like not very trustworthy when you ask like, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" because they think you're trying to sell them something.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it depends on how it's done,
Sure.
but usually I see that people will tell you whatever just so that they can move on with their shopping, right? And go to their families or do whatever. So it has to be very intentional, and I think it has to be very well prepared
Mm-hmm.
in order for you to get insights that actually are valuable. And I don't want to get into a tangent here, but
Yeah, we probably should do an episode specifically about that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
user
absolutely.
testing and focus groups and blind testing and even leading interviews, I think there is value in them, but like you just said, that has to be done right.
Yep.
And even in a product setting, realistically, you should just put your products up and see if they're purchased
Mhm.
or see if they're being used. And then after the fact, say, why did you buy this? Or,
Sure.
so there's ways that you can do it, I think would help with some of that, but absolutely agree with you. A lot of times in focus groups, they, because they're in that setting, they're expecting to be able to give you something.
Mhm.
And I've done a lot of testing for different products, technology more so than products on the shelf. But it's tricky because if they're in a setting where they're expected to give an answer, they're going to give an answer.
Mhm.
They have to be a pretty, not even honest person, but just pretty blunt person to be like, this is crap. Like, I don't like it. I don't like this. So anytime you can do a setting where it's less about the answers they're giving and more about the experience they're having with it. And
Yeah.
this helps easier when it's like a digital product because you can just watch them use it. So
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely agree. But it is a way to get some semblance of information, and it has to be done right though, for sure.
Yeah, I would personally do more of human-centered design sessions when you tell people, I'm not looking for any particular type of feedback, and this is how it's going to help me. And I really need you to be honest with me
Yeah.
because I'm trying to sell to people like you, right? But that's like a whole session and a
Yep.
setup. But yeah, I agree. We should do a podcast about
Yeah.
that specifically because it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of nuances, a lot of
Yeah.
details we could dive into that too. But yeah, so alignments are generally, they happen more frequently. They're not going to totally reinvent your brand. They're tweaks. They're the way we say this in our messaging should be refined here. Or this iconography doesn't fit with what we're doing. We need to refine that. Or this, maybe even a color palette that may be a little bit encroaching onto the bigger rebrand. The photo assets that we got from this photographer don't align with what we're trying to show in this new thing. So
Mhm.
let's refine those. It's little refinements over the course of your brand to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. If you think about the ship course, if you're just off a few degrees, you'll end up way over here when you meant to be here. So you're constantly just shifting a little bit back and forth. And that can happen, frequently, just depending on what you're doing and what your product is and your market and things like that.
I agree. Well, it's interesting because I'm thinking about the ship metaphor that you're talking about, and then I think that when a brand is authentic, there's still and with the authenticity, right? I'm still thinking about smaller brands that are so personal to
Mm-hmm.
someone that it's so natural if they shift and kind of look for themselves in different spaces, it's still authentic. It's still aligned with who they are. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like instead of just saying this is what we're always going to do, it is always going to be like that, and everything has to be exactly this. It's almost as if it's kind of expected for a brand as it evolves to kind of search for itself. But it, again, like I every time someone says brand to me, it's like a person. So that's how I tend to treat it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as individuals, we grow and change constantly. So we're always doing that ourselves, and your brand is allowed to do that too. But me personally, my core values hardly change. Something really drastically has to happen in my life or in the world for me to have this kind of a mental
Sure.
shift of what I think is right or what I believe in. And it's the same thing with the organizational brand. They'll have generalized, this is who we are. And now we're going to, bounce back and forth a little bit to find our exact way, but still within these bounds of who we are as an organization. When we talk a little bit more about a bigger shift. So, instead of we know where we're going and we're just adjusting to get there, it's like, oh no, now we're going to go someplace new. Now we're going to go over here. So that to
Jaguar?
me, we'll get there. We'll get to
Just
Jaguar.
asking.
So this is, what I kind of deem as like an actual rebrand. It's a bigger picture change. The identity suite that you're doing, maybe your values, but really the strategy of what you're doing as an organization probably is shifting enough that requires more depth of a change than just an update on a copy. You could be going into a totally different market or difference in terms of going local to international. Like those are big
Scaling.
moments of big scaling. Yeah, big scale. Even technology changes. Or maybe you've been around a long time and you haven't actually done enough alignments, or you haven't actually spent any time or investment on modernizing your brand because you could just be outdated. Maybe your company's still doing what it's doing, but it just doesn't fit the current time and market that you're trying to attach.
Would that really be considered a rebrand though?
I think so, yes.
I don't.
Okay. Tell me what you think a rebrand
Well,
is.
because rebrand to me is a much more robust change in identity. And again, I don't mean visual identity.
Yep.
The strategy, the core, right? What we're about and what we stand for. To me, rebrand is kind of a big repositioning.
So we're saying the same thing.
Are we?
Yes.
Are you sure?
I'm positive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Explain.
What you're saying is what I think a rebrand is. We're just saying it in different words.
I understand that, but when I say explain, I mean like in what way?
In what way is a rebrand the same thing as what you're saying? Because you just said it.
We're getting okay. This is getting convoluted.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Well, yes, but it seems to me like when you say rebrand happens when a company is modernizing,
Okay.
right? For example, so to me that's more of an alignment because it's alignment not with my core identity, like as a brand strategically, but it's aligning myself to the change that the 21st century with technology, everything that's happening. To me, that's not a rebrand.
So I think it is, but only because at this point, maybe we're redefining what the scope of a rebrand is. Because if I am going into an organization that wants to modernize and they want to reach a new market, if all they need to do is update a few assets, that's absolutely alignment. But if they're changing the strategy behind how they speak about their company, about how they offer their products, about the ways that they're marketing to their audience, and then all the visual and strategy behind it, that is a rebrand in my opinion, which sounds like what you're describing to me.
Yes, but it seems like you left that little piece out of our conversation because you said, hold on, you said that adjusting for like technical purposes, right?
Sure.
Making the company more modern
Sure.
or the identity, that would be a rebrand. To me, that alone is not a rebrand, but with everything else that you added that you forgot to add previously, yes, it is because now you're repositioning. Right?
Yeah, we're saying the same thing. I think we're just saying it different ways. So for clarity's sake, maybe the scope of the work that you're touching in terms of positioning, identity, the strategy, that entails even maybe a bunch of the visual, maybe a bunch of the copywriting, maybe a bunch of the marketing tactics. If you're just doing a one or two of those, then that is alignment. If you're doing a bunch or all of them, then it is a rebrand, in my opinion.
Okay. So let's kind of circle back to a business owner or a designer. Let's say that a company comes to me and they say, huh, we really need to rebrand. What kind of questions do I need to ask them as a designer to really understand if that's the case?
That's a good question. I would generally always start with what are their goals? Why do you think you need to rebrand? What goals are you attaching this project to? And why do you think that this rebrand is going to do that for you? And depending on what their answer is, it could be, oh yeah, you do need to change your whole presence, your whole strategy of how you market your organization. But if they just say something like, oh, our social media doesn't match our advertising campaign, like, okay, that's cool. Like, that's not a rebrand. That's just, let's make that match. Let's
Mm-hmm.
build consistency into your brand. So that would be more of an alignment stage. So generally, clients probably, well, not never, but rarely come to us and say, hey, we need a brand alignment. They just say, we need a rebrand.
Sure.
A lot of times if they're thinking, oh, we need a new logo and we need a new website and we need a new thing, that could potentially be a rebrand. But if they're not changing all the strategy behind it, it's really just a modernization of their visual language,
Mm-hmm.
which again, falls somewhere probably in between, alignment and rebrand. But to your point, rebrand is a bigger pivotal shift in what they're doing
Mm-hmm.
as an organization versus just tweaking something that they already have established, or maybe adding in a new piece to the brand.
Two things.
Yes.
Let's say that a company comes to you and say, hey, we need to rebrand and we need a new website and we need a new logo. And I just want to say that us as designers, we have to keep digging into why, because oftentimes that's just a symptom of something else that's happening. It's like being a doctor and diagnosing the problem. And it's right.
You can't just prescribe without understanding the symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, preferably, because oftentimes we do have clients that come to us and say, hey, we really need a new website. You look at their website and it's like, yeah, it's crap. But the vast majority of the times, the issue is much deeper than that. And this is just a symptom of that. But then also, you said something about rebranding, and then you mentioned changing the way that a company reaches their target audience.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's marketing.
Yes, but if they're going through no, that's not a
Thank
mic drop. If they're going through a rebrand, then their marketing has to shift. They can't have a totally new brand and their marketing just be whatever it was before. So to me, that's a really important aspect of that full cycle, whether we're a part of that particular piece of that project or not. If they're going through a full rebrand, marketing has to be involved in this new positioning, new initiative, new understanding
Sure.
of who they are as an organization.
Yeah, it's strictly connected, but it's not
Yeah.
the same thing.
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of when you rebrand, we talked a little bit about it in terms of scaling. And, one of the ones that you brought up earlier as we were kind of prepping was you're going through a merger as an organization. Like, that's a huge moment of potential rebrand
Yep.
because, does the new company coming into the old company, like, do they take on the brand of the new company? Is this two separate brands? You need to modernize both. Like, so that is a major time of a rebrand too. So it's just really about scale in terms of how much of the brand are you touching? How much of the scope are you changing? That really, I guess, just funnels the alignment to a bigger, full blown rebrand.
Yeah. I'm sighing because I've been through something like that and it is painful.
Yeah.
And it's painful for so many players. It's not just the marketing team, it's not just the owner of the company. There are so many things that have to be taken into consideration. Oftentimes if there's not enough strategy put behind it, then you end up just kind of visually and almost strategically mashing up
Just
the two brands.
Frankensteining it.
Right. And it's just it's awful.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Interestingly enough, I've seen teams that are so invested in the brand that they're working with that now a different brand is coming in and they're saying, okay, we're blowing everything up. We're changing everything. There's a lot of pushback. And there has to be a process of not only training people in how to use the new brand, whatever ends up being Frankenstein or not Frankenstein, but also explaining to these people why,
Yeah.
right? And that's huge because to me, a person who's really invested in a brand is the brand advocate, right? There is a connection to the brand
Yeah.
and they have to understand it. And how are they supposed to use it if they don't understand why it's there?
Yeah.
So anyway, it's just it's a tricky situation. It's not as easy as people might think.
Yeah. And then the kind of not last, but the biggest change that I would kind of put in that ship metaphor is where you literally turn the other direction. And that to me is a pivot. And you're doing that when probably your company completely changes. It happens a lot in the startup land where you have a good team, you're working on a product, maybe you get investment or not, but you realize that, oh, this market doesn't exist like we thought it did, or our product really isn't going to do what we thought it did. So they pivot into a totally different product, totally different business model, maybe a totally different market. And those obviously need, rebrand or branding because you're really doing something completely different. Most organizations aren't doing that. It's really more, either fast-paced tech startup world, or if you're just in a really bad position and you get kind of displaced that your business doesn't exist anymore, so you have to do something different. But yeah, so that's a third one. It's not as common just because most organizations are moving in the same path.
But when you have a company that's completely shifting, right? So let's say that they have a new product, a new strategy, new everything,
Yeah.
new target audience. Is that really a rebrand or is that a creation of a new thing?
No, and that's why I call it a pivot. To me, you're just starting over, something different.
Right.
So obviously in that
Brand loyalty or like what's the word? Equity.
equity, brand equity, you could have brand equity, depending on how long you were around in that form of an organization, but it's not common. I don't think that the majority of business owners are ever going to go through this level of pivot to where it's like, that didn't work. Let's do a totally different business. Like
Mhm.
entrepreneurs and tech startups, sometimes it happens. It's worth noting, but I don't think it's something that's going to happen that often. And really, at that point, you're just starting over from scratch. You're building a brand. You might have the same values as an organization or as a culture because the team is the same potentially, but generally, you're doing something new. So you're going to just
Yeah,
start
because
start from the beginning
you would probably fail much earlier.
in a pivot.
Well, yes and no, because you're saying like it doesn't happen very often that you have a company that has brand equity and then they pivot completely,
Yeah,
right? So that takes time to get
yeah.
brand equity. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like if the startup is going to fail, they probably fail early.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's generally not an established business that is running for years. But in terms of, and I want to get to Jaguar. We're getting close to it. But in terms of, the considerations of doing any changes, businesses are much safer in alignment territory because it's small changes, little things they're doing to refine who they are as an organization, as a brand. There's less blowback or public opinion that's going to come up across that. When you do bigger changes, such as identity changes, and I'm referring to the identity suite, such as logo and color palette and photography and like visual identity, or you're just doing a full blown rebrand, Jaguar, that you're going to run up against opinion.
Should.
You're going to have negative invitations because people hate change. Regardless if the change is better or worse, people hate change. So, to dive a little deeper into this topic, Jaguar recently went through a significant rebrand.
Yes.
And we already had a heated conversation about this, which we won't repeat for the viewers of this podcast.
We
But
won't put you through.
it's worth touching on in terms of the considerations that you need to have when you go through these type of things. Obviously, Jaguar is a huge brand that has tons of brand equity. People know it exists, even if they're not the right audience for it. Or a lot of organizations, you may not even know who they are. So they, may not have the same level of concern if they make a change of the public opinion behind it. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the Jaguar, a little bit of it,
Thank you.
a
I
little bit of it,
appreciate that.
of the Jaguar rebrand, but I will let you start.
Well, I mean, it's a polarizing thing, and some people love it, some people hate it, and we do understand that, when it's talked about, there's momentum, there's attention that's brought to it, and that's a good thing. But it actually received a lot of backlash
Mhm.
because I don't even know if I would call it a pivot. Let's say, I mean, rebrand
I definitely,
shift.
yeah, I think for me, it's definitely, and I guess this is a good example of how I equate the two. So to me, a pivot would be if Jaguar stopped selling cars and went and did something else. They're still doing cars, but they did a huge brand shift
Right.
where their historic audience is no longer the audience they're trying to serve.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really big distinction in terms of why they're doing what they're doing, or the level of change that they made, is that they really are changing their primary audience who they want to purchase their product.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, and again, we've talked about this for quite a while.
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell if this was a successful rebrand, regardless of whether we like it or not,
Yeah.
regardless of whether we agree with it or we think that it was done well or not, because it had some sort of an objective.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's going to hit that objective, I don't know, years from now, then it means that they did a good job. Was it risky? Absolutely. Sometimes it has to be, right?
Yeah.
Because for a company, if they sometimes they get into a situation, if they don't do something drastic, they're just going to go under.
Yeah.
Right. And especially with the change of electric cars, because that was the goal. It was talking to a younger audience who have a lot of money and are willing to buy electric cars, right?
Yeah.
So that is a shift for me personally as a branding person and a human being. I have a problem with it because, first of all, yes, it's to me, it's just completely throwing away the brand equity that they have worked for so many years. At the same time, again, they might have been in a situation where, you know what, that equity doesn't matter anymore because we're not selling, right? And if we don't sell, then we don't exist. So I understand that, but I don't have a problem with shifting, right? I don't have a problem with aligning, changing, even if it's somewhat drastic. I do have a problem with the way that they did it because I think that they took everyone by surprise because especially with the 30-second commercial that they came out with,
Mm-hmm.
that people actually thought it was about fashion. There was no mention of cars. And, you know, to your point, it's about the brand. Again, Jaguar cars, right? That's my expectation. And now you're taking my expectation and you're showing me something completely different. So I'm confused. I'm
So
completely confused. Go ahead.
we talked about in a previous conversation that you're not selling a product, you're selling a feeling. And you talked about toothpaste. You're not selling toothpaste, you're selling a happy smile or a confident personality and things like that. I have a different viewpoint on this rebrand than you do, which I think is good for this conversation. But you touched on a lot of points that I think are really important. We don't know what the objectives of this particular rebrand are. We do from the overall marketing statements of it, but we don't know how the business model was working before. We don't know if that brand equity, as you put it, existed or was valuable to them any longer. And they had to make this kind of bigger, broader switch to target a new audience. And by doing that, I don't have a problem with the concept of it. Whether it's a successful rebrand, whether they hit their metrics that they're trying to do, whether it's successful for the company, I have no idea. Whether or not it directs to me personally, because I'm not the audience that they're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm.
I also wasn't the old audience. So my personal relationship with Jaguar is almost nil. I had nothing to do with them other than, oh, I know what a Jaguar is. I don't have this visceral reaction to what they were doing. But as a slight tangent, Fiat, which is another automaker, Italian automaker, in the last year or two, they also went through, which I won't call a rebrand, I'll call a big alignment, where they are no longer selling gray vehicles or white vehicles. All their cars are primary bright colors because they don't want to be a boring car company. They have a certain target audience and a certain aesthetic and a certain feeling that they're trying to invoke with their brand. And that came off as a huge success, but it was also an alignment, not a rebrand, in my opinion, in terms of the scale, the scope, what they did. So they were realigning their brand to fit their audience, and Jaguar changed their audience.
They absolutely did. And it's not even a matter of thinking you've taken all these people that were your loyal customers and you're just like, okay, we're shifting to someone completely different. And that's okay. If it has to happen, it has to happen. Yeah. That's not even about that. It's do we, and again, this is something that we will be able to judge within the next few years. If you're talking to Gen Z, are they actually in favor of this rebrand? Does it resonate with them? Do they have the money to buy your products? Because ultimately the goal of this rebrand was also not only to speak to a younger audience, but to sell fewer cars at a higher price. So that's something that I'm really interested in because from what I'm seeing, Gen Z, there's political shifts, there's social shifts, economic, all these things. But and you know, I think it's kind of stupid to say, oh, the whole generation, right? The whole generation Z, everyone is the same because they're not. But however, there are statistics that talk about what is really important to them and sustainability and having a say and then having a work-life balance, like all these things that are important to Generation Z that we might not have thought about back in the day because there wasn't even a possibility. Yeah. And of course, there's going to be a lot of people who are all about fashion and who are about luxury. There's also that, to me, political, social component of that commercial. And that's also a problem, a personal problem that I have with this, because to me, that's a complete shift, not only in target audience and in the product, but also in the values of the company. And that's when it's becoming something completely different. So to me, they might have changed the name and just become something completely different. You know what I mean? And I probably would feel better about it. But I know what you're saying. I know. Okay. We're not the target audience.
No. We're definitely not target audience. But just to kind of lump in Gen Z, they're going for a sliver of Gen Z, not Gen Z. They're going for Gen Z with enough money to buy a really expensive car, that care about fashion, that care about luxury. If I was going for the boomer generation, maybe I'm only going for this sliver of. So even in that statement, we have to consider who really is their market. It's not just Gen Z. It's Gen Z slivered to this financial range
Well, yeah,
individual.
okay. So that's why I think we need to wait a little bit longer,
Exactly.
right?
Who
But
knows what it's going to do for them?
personally so want to have these conversations with that sliver of Gen
Yeah.
Z and say like, okay, does that resonate with you? Did it actually
Yeah.
make you buy the car? You know what I mean? It's because it is fascinating. It was a bold move. It was very risky. And I don't know. It's one of those things. It's either genius or awful. And
And
in this
we
case,
don't have the ability to say which one is right. Over time, we'll see if,
yeah.
the value, shareholder value of Jaguar goes up. Do
Right.
they go under? Who knows? They even could have just launched a sub brand or a set of cars that were geared more towards that audience than others. But we have zero knowledge about the research, the resources, what they did on their side to align this particular project. And in that sense, I don't care what they did. Like whether it resonates with me or not, they made a choice. They stuck with that choice, and I hope they don't like flip flop back because I hate when that happens. But to wrap why we're even talking about Jaguar is you have to consider the implications of the changes you're making to your brand. Because to your point, if they had great brand equity, I'm assuming they didn't, because why would you change the brand so drastically if you did? But we just don't know those nuances of the project. But you have to consider what this change means to your existing audience, to your new audience, and to, the perception of the general public about what your organization stands for.
Yeah, I think we need to readdress this like several episodes later.
In terms of like to see how they did, or like, yeah.
Exactly. I really do think that that would be
Yeah.
super beneficial. It's interesting because brands are there to sell. And if they don't sell, then they don't exist. I want to draw attention to how there's a feeling that we have that connection to
Yeah.
brands, right? Even though I've never owned a Jaguar.
I don't think you have a connection to Jaguar. I think you have a connection to what they're stating in their rebrand.
What do you mean?
Did Jaguar even exist in your mind before the rebrand?
Yes.
How
Of
so?
course. Now, I know I'm not the target audience.
No, I know, but when did you ever think about Jaguar as a brand until they did their rebrand launch?
I don't know when talking about cars, I guess.
Really?
But yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting.
Well,
I never think about Jaguar ever.
really?
I mean, even talking about cars, like Jaguar never pops in my head.
Okay, but even if you're not thinking about it, because the positioning of the brand happens in the consumer's mind.
Yeah.
So if someone said Jaguar in a conversation, you would have some sort of a visceral feeling,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of also what I'm talking about in the sense of there is a feeling and association positioning in my brain. And that's the thing that I'm talking about. Now it's a completely different thing.
I guess for me, just to play devil's advocate, just because you have a perception of a brand, if you don't use that brand, if you don't buy that brand, if you're never going to purchase something within that brand, I don't want this to sound as mean as it sounds, but why do you matter in that scenario?
Yeah, they're not talking to me.
Yeah.
Sure. No, the whole point of this was that even though a brand is there to sell, there's such an emotional connection
Sure.
to it, even if you're not the target audience. And that's what I'm saying, that there's value in that.
Yeah.
There's something to be leveraged and there's something to be understood. It's going back to the treating a brand like a person. There's so much more to it than just selling. And that's something that we need to understand. And again, regardless of whether it's positive, negative, if it works, if it doesn't work, if you like it, if you don't like it, it doesn't matter. It's just that there is that emotional connection. And going back to the toothpaste, right? Because you said, we talked about selling a feeling. Yes, absolutely. But even if it was a commercial of toothpaste, at some point I will either see toothpaste or I'll see someone's huge smile. You know what I mean? Something that will connect it in my brain to the brand. Here, we didn't. And we didn't. It was just because seriously, if I wasn't told that this is Jaguar, then I would have no idea. I would say, "Oh my gosh, is this Fashion Week?" Because there's no connection to it, and I think that's even more risky because of how big that pivot was. So to me, there's no bridge, and maybe that's the thing that I have a problem with, right? That there is no bridge. You literally, the people are falling down, and then a whole new group of people.
I could definitely understand that aspect of it. For me, it was just a single commercial that launched a brand versus the car commercial. I mean, I just don't have a problem with it. And generally, I think as designers, we are so fucking critical about rebrands and logos and collateral.
Job.
I know, and that's fine. But I also think that sometimes it's not warranted because we have no knowledge of what went into that change. There's plenty of brands out there that I've seen. I'm like, this is terrible. Why would you ever do that? It's so gross. So I'm guilty of it too. I'm not saying I'm over here just being so middle of the lane kind of thing, but I also don't know any of the strategy. I don't know any of the reasoning. I don't know any of the
Yes,
goals behind it.
but I have to disagree with you on one thing. So first of all, when we talk about being designers, we should actually know much more about this than any other person, even if we can make assumptions about what
Sure.
it was, right? Because normal people that are not designers, that are not into, are nerds like we are, they don't even know that there is a strategy and how all these things work, and why the companies that we're talking about even rebrand. But then you also said that we are super critical, and again, we need to be, right? And for people that are not designers, they have even more of a visceral feeling because that's what they're operating with. They're not operating with knowledge of branding, they're operating with their emotions,
Mm.
right? So that's, to me, kind of contradicts what you said.
I don't think so. Even for this particular thing, you could go online and go Jaguar rebrand, and you'll find a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
But in the scope and scale of everybody, let's just say United States, how many people are actually having this conversation? Is it just nerds like us? Or is general people going like, have you seen that Jaguar rebrand? I hate it. Or I love it. I don't know. Just because we can go online and find some other people bitching about something that we're bitching about doesn't mean that the general public has the same feeling about it. We just don't know.
But can we assume that there is a representation of people's opinions? Do you know what I mean?
No, I don't know what you mean.
Well, because you're saying if we go online and
Yeah.
we see certain sides of the conversation,
Yeah.
we don't really know how many people are talking about it.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, does it even matter
Yeah.
how many people are talking about it? And then second of all, can't we assume that if there are 100 articles about conversations that people are having about the rebrand of Jaguar, can we assume that this takes space in people's minds?
I don't think so.
No?
No. It's obviously taking space in some people's mind. I mean, we've been talking about it for like 20 minutes now. But it doesn't mean it's taking space in anybody else's mind. For instance, I am very, very familiar with AI because I've been doing a lot with it for the last year and a half. I use it every day. I'll go and talk to half my family. They don't even know it exists.
Mhm.
It's a similar kind of concept of just because it's important to us doesn't mean it's important to anybody else.
But why does it matter?
Well, that's what I mean. It doesn't matter. It matters to the audience that they're trying to sell to. And if it works for them and they make money on it, then it was a successful rebrand.
Yes, but it also matters to us as designers.
It doesn't matter to me as a designer. I don't give a shit about Jaguar.
Completely. I mean, if it doesn't matter, there's nothing for me to say about that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's up.
So
Mhm.
to wrap it up, there are going to be opinions about your rebrands.
Hopefully.
That was,
Hopefully,
yeah, and
yes.
hopefully some people care. And granted, obviously some people care about it and other people don't. But, you know, from a branding, a strategy perspective, we have our opinions about it, but we don't know the end result of what that is just because we don't know. We just can't. We can't know that because we're not a part of Jaguar or the marketing team or whatever. But you just have to be aware that there can be considerations when you make a change to your brand, your marketing, your product. I mean, anything. Like anytime you make a decision, there's going to be some recourse to it. But it's important just to make sure that you're either A, prepared for it, or B, at least understand that this may or may not be received in the way that you would like it to be received. And you have to either be strong in your strategy and understand the reasons why you're making these changes and you feel good about the recourse behind them, or be flexible enough to be like, that didn't work, let's change it, or let's fix it, or let's do something different. So
Sure.
it's the Jaguar fable is be prepared to have some of those things potentially happen. Okay. Is that it? Did we cover everything? I guess let's recap. So your brand,
Yeah.
so on course, if you're making little things, it's alignments.
Mhm.
You can do those often or as often as you need to. They're smaller changes, maybe individual pieces of your brand. And then from alignment, then you go into, if you're changing more of your bigger positioning, your identity, your strategy, your whole visual language, how you're marketing things, like that's a bigger change, i.e. Jaguar, that's a bigger rebrand. And then won't happen often, but if you kind of say like, this business is dead, let's do a new business, that's a pivot. But generally that's just starting a brand from scratch at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, yeah, I think we've chatted about brand evolution quite a bit, alignment, rebrandings, and less frequency pivots. But as you're focused on some of these aspects and making sure that you're moving the brand in the right direction, regardless of how much you're swaying back and forth, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. Remember, your brand story is yours to define.
Follow us at Co-Branded for more tips and strategies. Stay curious, stay creative, and we'll catch you next time.